a knife with a good 5-6 inch blade is what I like to use the most. But this isn't necessarily about what I like to use the most. This is about the most possible emergency scenarios that could happen to me, and would I have something that could help me meet each of those scenarios. Hey guys, today I thought I'd go over my multi-tool and all of its modifications for a loan, but not only that, I'm going to go over all of my cutting edges for a loan. Saw, axe, knife, multi-tool, arrowheads, everything that's sharp, every sharp tool. I'm going to cover that today in detail. I think this is going to be a really interesting video for anyone trying or hoping to get on a loan or do anything like a loan, but probably also interesting for everyone else as well as you look at the modifications to my multi-tool especially. So let's get right into it. And I've assembled every sharp edge that I took on a loan, plus every sharp edge that I thought about taking on a loan. So I'm going to begin with my philosophy on cutting edges. What I normally do in life for knives, for skinning, gutting, and everything, and then where my thought process went as I was approaching a loan. I'm going to go over some of these awesome tools, which you wouldn't have seen because I didn't take them. And then I'm going to get to my multi-tool and all the modifications that I did, which is going to be super interesting. But firstly, when I'm just running around hunting and butchering, skinning deer, you know, if it's just a normal day, I'll be using one of these two pocket knives. These are Benchmade pocket knives. Just pulled these out of my hip pocket. This is the Boost, I think, and I use this more than anything, and this is the Adamas 275, I think, folding. Now you'll notice not a single one of my edges has a serrated piece at the bottom of the pocket knife blade. I don't like that. I just like a good sharp edge. But these two knives are literally, I'll be carrying one of these two knives in my grave. I'm carrying one of these at all times. I like to carry this a lot, but this Adamas is pretty bulky. You want to carry this when it's like war, the nuclear holocaust style of running and gunning, to where when you want a knife that can do anything, cut open a 55-gallon drum or skin a deer, you can do it all, and this knife will not be destroyed. Can't say enough good things about this knife. But it is a little bulky for your everyday carry. So I found that this Boost, I think it's called a Boost, Benchmade, given to me by a friend, is like the best combination of size. I mean, it's long enough blade to reach a heart, but thin and fine enough that it's just great for doing fine work, and it's a wonderful everyday carry. I love this knife, and I've carried it so much, I've worn almost all the handle stuff off the handle. Anyways, if I'm just hunting for myself, if I'm out here skinning a deer, 90% of the time I will be using this pocket knife or this other Benchmade that I showed you right here. If I'm feeling like I ought to look cool, and I go through the energy to camo up and do all that kind of stuff, I'm going to be carrying this hunting knife right here. This is a knife I made when I was a kid, and I really love this knife. It's my best hunting knife. The blade is a little long for a bushcraft knife. You'll notice in these three blades that I've just showed you, my philosophy in a blade is that a drop point is the best. It's the most direct, puristic shape to just straight in. And it's got another wonderful capability. If you are skinning along the belly of an animal and you do not want to pierce the belly, drop point is the easiest thing to run your knife between the hide and the membranes of that stomach cavity and not pierce the stomach, because you can run the spine of your knife along there and it won't cut it, and the tip of your knife is just up from that stomach membrane just a bit, and then but still cutting the hide. So drop point has a lot of upsides. To me, it's the ultimate blade shaped. Whereas if you have more like a Bowie or an old-time Skinner style that has a swept point here, it's much harder to cut along that belly, especially on smaller animals, without piercing into the belly. So anyways, this is just a side note. I like drop point a lot. But this knife is, man, I do love to skin with this knife. It's so light, but it's a little bit long. Before, I thought that every knife should be long enough not just to pierce in and touch a heart, but to basically cut a heart pretty much in half as well. Now, you need 3.5 inches to reach a heart. in a 100 to 300 pound range creature. And this has not only that, but enough inches to go all the way through a heart and cut it straight in half. And I used to think that was really important. I don't so much anymore. This is a stacked leather handle, and I really think that stacked leather is one of the most underrated handle materials out there. You inundate that stuff with oil so much that this is now impermeable to any type of moisture or anything, and you'd think really that it's a synthetic substrate, but it's not. It's just stacked leather rings. I really like that as a handle substance. Now, when I auditioned for a loan, I just used this. And I thought to myself, I could go do a loan with this knife, but there's so many more choices so many more tasks that I'd rather have a different tool for, so I ultimately left my favorite skinning knife at home. But with knife blade length, because I'm going to get up to a pretty extensive blade length right here in a minute, let me talk about my feelings about knife blade length. There's tiers of capability, and with just cutting under skin and cutting up through it to skin, I mean, that's all you need to do to skin a moose or a rabbit. Either way, it's no difference. You don't need a long blade to do either one. So this multi-tool blade, which I'll show you here, this can just as effectively slide up under moose skin and cut up through it, to make the cuts as this blade. So really, it's not that bad. I mean, you might think you want to take a long sheath knife because what if you have to skin big game? That's not what you need a long sheath knife for. It's not. Because a blade this long, if I was skinning that moose, this much blade is all the blade I would have used on this longer blade. So that didn't hinder me at all using a blade this short for skinning the moose. But, it would have been nice for separating stuff to have a longer blade. But ultimately, once you have game, whether it's fish, now it was hard to flay fish with this clunky, short, stiff object. That was where it was more annoying than processing the moose. But none of that is a challenge, because once you have the fish, you're happy. You could be skinning it or flaying it with a sharp rock, and you could take all day to do it, but you have the fish, so who cares? You got to do something all day. So it's really not a problem. But when you have a short blade, it's about processing other things, wood and other things. I'm going to give you a little example right here. And to do that, I'm going to have to grab a stick. So blade length, once you want to step up to the next tier of capability, I think it's this. I think it's processing things like this branch, for example. There's 100 reasons you might want to process this branch. Me, I was building fish weir material a lot. And so what you do is, if you have a blade this short, or a tool this built like this, with a hinge right here, there's no way you're going to be hauling back and whacking on that limb to get the limb off. That's how to get this limb off with as least effort as possible, is to lop it. I think that's the word that we want here, lopping capability. And with a tool built like this, you're not going to lop, because you could really damage the lock right here of the blade, the hinge. And also, it's just not weighted for lopping, because all the weight's in your hand instead of on the blade. And that's where, so when you're processing this, you're going to be using all arm strength. You're going to be cutting through it. Harder on your edges, and also much harder on your arm, on your body, and slower. That's the biggest problem of all. It's slower. I don't like to be slow. So a longer blade like this, you have the capability called lop, which is basically, you back your hand up. I back my hand up close to the end of the handle. That's why I always put a knot near the end of the handle of my knife. And with this action right here, just with a little wrist flick, you've lopped, and you can lop off hundreds and hundreds of branches that way and not have it expended as much energy as carving off a few of them with elbow strength. Okay, so this one right here, I'm literally going to go lop off every little thing. All of you guys have lopped before, but I want to tell you, once you get out to the blade length of lopping, that's the next tier of capability. So it's not about the ability to reach deep enough to cut in the hide of the skin of moose, because all you need is 3 inches for that. That would be nice. A nice capability on a loan is to be able to have a knife that's long enough to lop things. So you're skinning trees. You're knocking all the limbs. And a lot of those trees up there, willow, even the spruce and stuff, have a lot of these teensy tiny limbs that you would like to lop off. It just feels natural and you'd like to lop them. But you can't, because you've got a multi-tool blade. that's where you feel the sting of missing that longer blade. So that brings me to another tool that I almost took. Now, can't wait to show you this baby right here. What? This thing is mad as a meat axe. Okay, this blade was hand forged for me by one of my best friends, a Marine buddy, Sky Barkley, Redemption Forge, and he built this knife for me for a loan. It's a 10.25-inch blade. The spine is quite heavy, but it's honed down on such an angle that, oh my goodness, razor's edge and easy to resharpen. So lopping with this thing, I mean, you could be lopping near cabin logs in half with this thing. It can cut like an axe. Pretty good sized tree. I think I could have done it with one whack. There are several reasons why I didn't take this on a loan. They have a 10-inch overall limit for a knife on a loan, but on this particular season they also had a category called machete, and this could have qualified for machete. So, but the reason it didn't qualify is because in designing this knife with my friend and telling him just what I wanted, I had a divot put right here, and this divot is for a bow drill. You've seen bushcraft knives like this where you can put the bow drill spindle in that divot and use this as the top socket and press down that way. That divot made it not qualify to go on the show because it would be considered 2 items in one. That's kind of weird, but that's just how it is. And so I didn't take it. But there's also the issue of chopping through ice. Now, with a knife like this, I could get through ice once or twice. I could make that happen. But sometimes out there, you want to chop 10 or 20 holes in one day. Because what you don't see on the show is that when Dub or William or me, when we go out there and chop a hole in the ice to catch a fish, it looks like we just went out there, found a spot, chopped one hole, and tried fishing. Well, what we probably did, what I did, is I tried a spot and tried a spot and tried a spot, and it was too shallow. Tried this spot, and tried this spot. Then we chopped the hole where we caught the fish, and that made it into the show. So there's a lot of hole chopping. And even 4 or 5 inch thick ice would take so much energy to get through without an axe. And, I knew ice was going to be an issue, so the axe was the clear choice to take. But I believe that there is a latitude in the world, and I don't know exactly which latitude I would pick out, but north of that latitude, an axe up here is the ultimate tool. You can build a cabin with it, build a ship, a wooden ship with it. You can make a life with it. You can chop through ice. You can kill a bear with it if you had to, or if you were lucky. South of that latitude, I 100% believe that a machete replaces the axe as the ultimate single tool to have with you. And that's why, alone being in cold climates, usually like it is, there's a lot of bushcraft stuff that will never get portrayed in a climate like that, because bringing in south of that latitude where a machete becomes the tool, things just change. It takes a lot of different looks in bushcraft. But this thing was, I will just have this forever. One of my sons will inherit this because I love it that much. It's such a weapon. I promise you, this could take an arm off with one whack. Now, the handle here this is one piece from tip to tip. It's one piece through here. The hilt is one piece forged from the bar of steel that the blade was forged from, and so is this middle block where that divot was drilled that disqualified the knife from alone. That middle block, same piece as the tang all the way back to the tip, and it's all different thicknesses through here to balance the weight to where I just can't believe how much he did to forge this knife. And it's got this wonderful ball peen beaten look to it that makes it look wonderfully medieval. I just love that. Now, African blackwood down here, but this piece up here is pretty special. I brought this from Tajikistan. This is Marco Polo sheep horn, killed by wolves. And this knife just blows my mind, and I thought you guys would like to see it as well. I'm going to sheath this thing before it hurts someone. But that knife right there was It was a very difficult choice for me, very difficult issue, because I wanted to have this knife for so many things. But in the end, I want to talk about what I did take. So in my cutting tools that I took, I think I'll go over the one that'll take the least amount of words first. This silky saw. This thing, just about every contestant takes one right now, and rightly so. Now, I've used hand saws a lot before because I grew up without electricity. I grew up in the bush cutting firewood by hand. And so I know how a lot of saws work, and I would have... Saws are a touchy issue. If you have a saw with a heavy enough blade that it doesn't curve in the wood or kink as you push it back and forth, that's the definition of a successful saw. And the Katana Boy has just crossed that threshold for thick enough blade that kinking and bending and swerving in the wood is not a problem. When I see bow saws, I hate those things with all my being. And I'm not trying to be dramatic here, I just do, because I've had to use those things for hundreds of hours, cutting firewood for a wood stove with bow saws. And I will tell you one thing, they are not worth anything to me. I would rather just have this axe here. If it was a bow saw, I'd have never taken a saw at all. I'd take this axe here because I'd 100 times rather cut wood with this axe than with the bow saw. The only advantage it could have at that point would be able to make square notches with the bow saw, but I just do without that. But the saw that Roland took, which is a good old crosscut saw, that is a heavy enough blade that it'll never kink or bend in a cut or swerve, jamming itself in a cut. And a bow saw will do that. The blade gets twisted. If you've used bow saws much, you'll hate them too. But the saw that Roland took was heavy like this, and the Katana Boy has a heavy enough blade that it can, when you're pushing it through a cut, it won't kink like this, and it won't start swerving in the wood like this, because that'll bind the saw and you won't be able to drag it back and forth. But the Katana Boy, when these came out, it changed the game, and no longer, would you just want to have just an axe. This can cut firewood and cut shelter wood and cut notches like, it's as valuable a tool as you could have. So this was definitely going with me. And did I make any modifications to it? No, I didn't. Because I just didn't have, I've seen the spines of it sharpened before, but I didn't want to be cutting my gear when it's with all my gear. And I knew that anything I could do with that sharpened spine, like flesh hides, I could do it with that axe head. I like to flesh hides with an axe head. And so I just didn't have really inspiration strike me about this. The only thing is, for those of you who are like, I want to be on alone, you need to be able to service this saw out there. So we have a tendency to cut up our screwdrivers on our multi-tools so that they will become chisels. That's fine, because I found that if you keep a can opener like this, knowing that you could work with metal cans if you find them, this can opener works as a screwdriver to service this silky saw just fine. So knowing that gave me a lot of peace of mind to be able to change my screwdriver in the multi-tool. So axe is next. My next cutting tool is my axe, and there's nothing too much special that I could say here except I love this axe. It doesn't have as broad and heavy as a head as many axes that get taken, like the Jordan Jonas axe and others. This is an old style Hudson Bay trapper's axe, but I just love it. The flat butt end on the axe for hammering capability is paramount. I think that's incredibly important out there. A lot of times you need to hammer stuff. There's only one modification I made to this. Now, I had other modifications that I would have wanted to do, but those were not approved. So the only modifications that I did was I took a Dremel tool, and I wanted to do something with my ferro rod. So with the ferro rod, I took a metal striker, and I wanted to be able to use this metal striker as a pike lure. If there's clear water, pike, I hear, really love shiny things, and I'm like, I want as many shiny things as I could get. I don't know if I'll find tin cans. Incidentally, I never did find a tin can. Nothing like that. So I took this to use as a pike lure, never ended up using it. But I said, in the absence of a striker for my ferro rod, let's say I use it as a pike lure and it gets lost on a log underwater. what I did was, I'm never going to drag a ferro rod across the cutting edges of my tools, you know, because that's where you get the sparks, is on the cutting edge. So I took a Dremel tool and I cut another small cutting edge in the chin of this axe where it's irrelevant to its function, to where I could draw my ferro rod across this, put my tinder bundle up against the axe head, draw my ferro rod across it, and light the tinder across the chin of my axe. So that was really the only modification that I did to this axe before going. It serviced, it worked so well, but now it has this wonderful modifications, which is all the carving into the handle of every animal and fish that I killed. And maybe someday in a video I'll go over all of these marks. There's a lot of marks there. So the saw and the axe are pretty much no-brainer. They are what they are. And I wish I could recommend to you where to find an axe like this, but I can't, because it's an old axe. I've had it since I was a small kid, and I have no idea where you could buy one just like that. But I knew I could rely on it, because I used it for years. When I got cast on a loan, the handle had been busted out of it, and that was the only thing I had to do, was replace the handle. The handle had been lost over the years. I hadn't been using it. So, the multi-tool. Let's get down to the multi-tool. Here we are. I'm going to go over all of its modifications, but in the choice between taking a multi-tool and a knife, I had a couple things in front of me. Firstly, a knife with a good 5-6 inch blade is what I like to use the most. But this isn't necessarily about what I like to use the most. This is about the most possible emergency scenarios that could happen to me, and would I have something that could help me meet each of those scenarios. And that makes it to where I have to put aside the thing that I like to use the most, and I have to take what has the capabilities to get me through things that might come up. You know, you got to think through a lot of different possible disaster scenarios, and the multi-tool brings a lot to the table. I'm surprised that they allow multi-tools on the show, because it's so many tools in one that I would write it out of the rules, I think. But that would eliminate a lot of cool bushcrafting. So it's a tough choice. So let's go over this multi-tool. Firstly, with the multi-tool, I have 2 knives. So that's the first thing that I want to point out right there, is that this multi-tool is not just one knife for me. There's a serrated blade over here and a straight blade. So of course I skin the moose with a straight blade, but at all times I have another razor sharp blade ready to do stuff, bushcrafting and notches and cut wood and all that stuff. So typically I kept my mental organization this way. I would cut wood, notches, and do bushcrafting with a serrated blade, and I would do animal processing with the straight blade. All that being said, in an emergency, I had 4 more knives in the broadheads that I took, and this is a really critical deal. This is the broadhead that killed the moose, and I actually did skin a little bit of the moose with this arrow once I found it inside the moose's chest cavity. I thought I was going to lose this multi-tool one time up in the chest cavity of the moose for a while. There was so much puddles of congealed blood in there, you know, and if you drop it in the chest cavity while you're reaching up trying to cut the aorta off of the heart or something, it can be a while to find it, and you don't want to reach in there and get stabbed. So I grabbed this arrowhead and I started processing the moose with this arrowhead. So I knew that in an emergency I would have knives, because I took 4 broadheads, and you can process fish all day long with the broadhead. It won't be handy, but it's better than a sharp rock. So that's why I just brought this down, is because I want to talk about you get extra knife blades, unless you've shot them away. Now, with this multi-tool, there's also 2 other really critically important tools. There's this saw, and where's the next one? Oh, it's in the case. I don't want to be losing stuff here. In the case, I have the other tool, this file. I cut so much stuff that eventually the leather strop that I was using wouldn't sharpen this blade enough anymore, and I had to take this to it. Now, this has a diamond side. I was careful to select a tool that had a file with a smooth diamond side on it, because that's what you want in putting an edge back on a knife. It also has a rough side on this side for, you know, smoothing wood and doing things like that. But this diamond side was worth its weight in diamond, just about, and I snapped it off so that I could use it on its own blade. I wish there was a way to have it just be removable and click back in. But then they'd probably eliminate it. But either way, that was the whole tool would be worth it for these 4 things right there. If it didn't have anything else on it, it'd be worth it for these 4 things right there. 2 cutting blades, the saw, and this diamond file, which is now my sharpener. So I have to keep it stuck in the sheath over here to keep it secure. Now, I'll talk about this saw blade just a little bit, and I'll say that this saw blade is the regular, it looks like a wood saw that comes in the Leatherman tool. This is the Leatherman Charge Plus, I should say. It's very similar to a Wave, but there are some key differences. That's one thing I would change if I could, is I would have a blade in here that's more like a diamond blade that you might put in a sawzall to where it could also cut bone, because this saw will not cut bone. You cut bone, a leg bone or something like that with this saw to try to craft something out of a bone, and you've ruined it. But it will cut moose antler just fine and not damage it at all. Moose antler is spongier than I realized, and this will cut moose antler. Just in case you were curious. Now, I want to tell you that the tools that go inside this, I built it up out of 3 tools. I took tools out of these tools and I built this tool. So, for some reason, when I got back to base camp, I filmed a video of this in base camp, but I don't know if I'll be allowed to post that. And it was all filmed wrong anyway, so I'm doing this over. For some reason, when I got to base camp, I took my tools out of it and put it back to its natural state with screwdrivers and stuff in it. And I don't know why I did that. I'd like it to just be in its state that it was like out on a loan. But it has this like a removable screwdriver bit thing right there. And I didn't want that. So, you see how thick that tool is? I replaced it with 2 tools. So what I did was, I took a can opener. Gonna show you which can opener. Yeah, this one right here. I took another can opener like this out of one of these other multi-tools, and I ground it down to this very fine awl that I use for sewing. And I loved having this tool in this Leatherman right here. If I could design one for bushcraft with Leatherman, and I'm giving away all my secrets right here, so I'll never make any money in my life. It would have a fine awl just like this, you know, like about the size and design of a Speedy Stitcher leather tool, about like that. So this awl was really handy. I used it to sew a lot of moose hide when I put up that range hood inside my shelter. I used it to sew up the hole in the moose hide that the arrowhead had made so that mice couldn't get in. So I put that tool in and replaced the screwdriver with this. And then I put in the only tool that broke in my multi-tool was Leatherman's boring tool. So it's like this. It comes down to a point, and I think it's called an awl, but it doubles as a boring tool because it has a little groove with a cutting edge on it on this side. Not sharp, but enough to bore the edges of a wood hole that you're boring. And it has a hole up here in the tip. And while I was boring a piece of wood, it snapped off right at that hole. So Leatherman's boring tool there is boring a hole that would be about a 3/8 inch in diameter, 5/16 inch in diameter hole once you've bored it. That's an important capability for a lot of bushcrafting stuff, and it's wonderful to have. But this boring tool in particular isn't the best. It'd be better if we could all design a stronger and faster boring tool that won't snap like this. This was the only part of any of my tools that broke, snapped, or had a problem. But up until that point, I got a lot of use out of it. So I put this boring tool in the Leatherman. Now, another reason I chose this Leatherman is because it has scissors that I could trim my mustache hairs and all that kind of stuff with. Scissors can be really important, a wonderful capability. But a small fold-out scissor like this, to me, was much better than the Leatherman P4, I think it's called, that has the fold-out scissors on the outside. Because on the outside, that would have to take away my diamond file or the wood saw. And I really wanted those. So this had the little scissors that folds up inside. That's real critical. Now there's 2 other tools that I've got here on this side of the Leatherman. And I'll go over these. Firstly, I had to buy a set of these Leatherman wrenches to take all this apart and to reassemble these. And in reassembling these tools into the Leatherman, I had to do some grinding because they came out of tools that are not the same size. And you see how this has a notch at the back for the lock on the Leatherman. These had to be ground down a bit to all fit in, and had to be tooled a little bit so that they work properly and that the Leatherman would close on them. Now over here, it has the scissors, but it also has a small screwdriver. Now this small screwdriver is reversible. Phillips on one end, flat blade on another. But what I did was, a friend alerted me to this idea. My buddy Dr. Rodney Hard. I made a cut. You might see a cut. I'll put it right there against my forehead. There's a cut that's a reverse hook, like a crochet hook. And then I sharpened the other end like a needle, and I used this for sewing, because I would hook a thread in it, and I would sew, and I sewed through my t-shirt material to sew closed a bag to hold a quantity of jerky hanging from my rafter in a t-shirt bag. And so that was very cool. I had a sewing needle in that tool, and that was awesome. And then over here, I made my wood chisel out of my flat blade screwdriver. And I made a very, very sharp, razor sharp wood chisel point right here. And that was wonderful for making notches and crafting a bunch of different things. I did notches in... It's never showed on the show what my hinge post looked like for my door of my shelter. But that thing was awesome. It was a design I'd noticed in Afghanistan. I'm sure it's from all over the world. But it was a post that turned on a wooden socket in the ground, and I had to put notches at the top of the post to affix it to my shelter, and it would spin that way. And I would use this for that kind of stuff. And then I also used it for silly little stuff like carving all the faces on those little wooden pieces of my game, Trial by Fire. I pretty much used this because it's a small, fine, but very sharp point. So I was able to do this again and ruin my screwdriver because I had the can opener that can service the silky saw. So what else is there about this? I think that's about it for blades. Yeah, that's all my sharp blades. That's my strategies and my thoughts on the sharp blades. And I would have to say I'm just thrilled with how this tool worked. Things I would change about it is I don't like that there was plastic on the outside. And it had to be there for the spacing of these bolts. But that plastic, you see, you're going to boil your multi-tool a few times because it's going to get full of gunk, fish gunk and moose gunk and gut gunk down in all the crevices, and there's a million crevices. So you're going to hook a piece of wire onto it and put it in a pot of boiling water sometimes to sterilize it, and that's to help keep cross-contamination out so that you don't get sick in your stomach. But when there's plastic on there, you're afraid that you're going to melt the plastic. I wouldn't have the plastic on there, so I would have just metal like the P4 or the Leatherman Wave, but those don't have the tool mix that's exactly in here. So I wanted this one, and I put up with the plastic. But I would also have it higher visibility, not just black, in case you dropped it in some dark mud or leaves or in the water. That's a good one. Or inside a moose, if you drop it inside a moose. I would replace that boring tool, and I would like it if this saw, even though it worked fine for me because it cut that moose antler, I would like to have cut bone with a saw, and I would replace this blade, hopefully with a one that folded to the outside, open it on the outside of the tool like this, but with a diamond cutting blade, diamond saw blade that could cut through bone or wood pretty fast. And to me, that would make this mix of tools with those three changes, would make the ultimate bushcrafting multi-tool. And watch this come out next year. Somebody will do it. So, and it won't be me. One other thing, bushcrafting with a multi-tool. A lot of people talk about batoning with a multi-tool. And yes, you can do it. I did it. But you have to do it correctly or you'll destroy your multi-tool. This is a big deal. So let me get a little stick here. Let's pretend that this is the baton. All right? When you strike a blade with a baton, you can never put pressure on this hinge right here for the blade or your multi-tool will be destroyed. It's not that strong so as to take a strike from a baton very many times, if any. But the proper way to run a baton anyways is to strike exactly in the center of where the most resistance is in the object that you're cutting. exactly in the center of that, so that your force is not transferred to any part of the blade, but exactly into the center of that resistance that you're cutting through. And you can do that on a multi-tool blade like this and not destroy the multi-tool. This multi-tool is proof of it. But if you get that strike wrong and strike back here by the hinge, or even out here by the tip of the blade where it can lever over and break the hinge, that way it'll break the hinge. So just be wary of that if you're going to bushcraft with a multi-tool or with a Swiss Army knife or any other hinged blade. Anybody that's batoning with a Swiss Army knife, they're careful with this baton to strike it just right. And by just right, I could draw a diagram of this, but say here's a stick that you're cutting. You have to have a straight line from the center. Let me get a little twig here to represent this. You have to imagine a straight line from the center of the stick where my eyeball is through the blade, and you have to strike directly as if that's a nail that you're driving straight through the center of that resistance object. You have to strike right there. So I hope that helps if you're bushcrafting with a multi-tool. If you've had problems with Leathermans, you know, that could be why, but I don't know. Anyways, wonderful tool. It still smells like alder smoke and a little bit of fish and some moose lard and all the wonderful things that I miss so much. And watch carefully, because I might video very soon. I'm going to take another stab at making a hunting knife of my dreams. It's going to have a moose antler handle, probably, with a piece that I brought back, and a blade a little shorter than this, and it's not going to be quite as ribbon straight, you know, as this one. I might put that video up again soon. But that's all my tools and my modifications that I did to them, and I think that's everything I can think of to mention. Yeah. I hope this is enjoyable and fun for you guys. I know it's been really long, but there's a lot there. There's a lot of thoughts, a lot of strategies and thoughts in there. So particularly if you are getting on a loan or something like this, I hope that this will be helpful for your own thought processes. Yeah, see you guys.